Hello and welcome. This is episode 12 of a podcast Engineer-to-Manager. My name is Alex Maestrenko. I'm a podcaster and advisor to their CDTO in Kyiv City Council, Ukraine. In this podcast, we are diving into the essence of engineering management. We explore what engineering management is and what are their challenges and opportunities. For this journey, I invite experienced EMs from different parts of the world. Today's guest is Casey Dai. Hello, Casey. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me.
Nice to have you finally. It's good to have the guest with such experience and with their last shift from their industry to your own company. You're a founder.
Yeah.
So basically, just to introduce what I got from your CV, you have been working for quite some time as a data engineer in various companies such as Capgemini, Manulife, Accenture, and Procter & Gamble, just going back in history from where you started. Huge companies with multi-billion businesses, and now you are in a startup that you have started, so just kind of on your own. How does it feel?
The short is very, very different. And you're kind of having like a second wind in your career, so to speak. But a lot of overlapping elements still. It's taking from, let's say, the first quarter of your career and then reconfiguring a lot of the pieces while still learning a lot of new things along the way to piece it together. But yeah, definitely very different from all aspects in terms of schedule, prioritization, energy, time management, everything, versus working in a large enterprise in my corporate career.
Oh, wow. Before we dive into the details of your transitions and switches between different companies, dear listeners, go and subscribe to this channel or put the bell so that you get the notification about new videos. More of them are coming soon, and that I don't want you to miss any of the new interesting stuff that's coming to this channel. So, Casey, How did you start your career as an EM? Because you started as a data analyst, right, at Procter & Gamble, like some time ago, right? And you were doing some hands-off stuff, analyzing data, working with real things at Procter & Gamble, and then you decided to move to, people management. How come? Why?
I'll focus mostly on I'll spend more time on the transition to EM, but I had a career prior to tech, which I came from a business background, and growing up around a family of entrepreneurs, the natural path was to go to business school out of undergrad. I joined Procter & Gamble after 2 internships there to join their personal brands skincare portfolio, where I was doing a lot of financial analysis, getting into the data and doing financial projections, measuring market campaign effectiveness, and just trying to find a lot of operational efficiencies or how we better work with our retailers to go to market together. A lot of those problems naturally lended itself to something that can be modeled, where you don't have to rely purely on intuition, is the key insight I picked up there. So that was the natural gateway into analytics, machine learning, and data science. So after about a year and a half in my role at P&G, I decided to basically hit the reset button on my career and go take a master's in analytics, which eventually led me into Accenture, joining their data science and analytics practice. So that was the pivot from business to tech. And in the Accenture, the 2 years I spent there, had a lot of interaction with a variety of client projects, and eventually moved up to an engagement manager role, which you're handling the client relationship and also the project delivery of the contract from end to end. That felt like everything was centered around the engagement, which was great and very fast paced for learning. However, I wouldn't call it a true people management role. Or engineering management.
It sounds more like a project management, right? Or the portfolio management, where you basically manage customers and the project delivery, but not their team or people on the team to do the project, right?
Exactly. I felt that a lot about a year and a half into it, especially when I switched to an internal role as a data science resident expert for their innovation hub. So you do some people management, but in a project context, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some like mentorship that you take on for junior folks coming in to grow their career, but it didn't feel like you were directly in charge and you had a lot of skin in the game in terms of who you hire, developing their careers, which I really got when I moved out of Accenture into Manulife. And that was one of the critical criteria, I would say, to move on from an engagement client-based work structure to leading a team at Manulife and building it from the ground up. So that was actually my first entry point into engineering management, I would say, when I moved from Accenture into Manulife.
That's a big change, right? Because basically at Accenture, you work as a tech consultant and then you work on different projects and basically you're external to the customers. Whereas at Manulife, IT is a part of a bigger organization and it is a support for business, right? So their core business is insurance and finance, as far as I know. And their IT there to support the business. And it's kind of a very hard shift. How did it feel?
It's definitely a huge shift. But you're essentially going from providing professional services to working for one of your clients, essentially. So underneath, there were still some underlying fabric. So it wasn't a complete restart from scratch. Thank goodness, looking back, because I not only pivoted from a project leadership or engagement type of role to people management, but also I moved from data science AI to data engineering at that time. So there was a domain shift from a technical perspective as well, in addition to your people management responsibilities, and an increase in seniority in terms of your scope responsibilities and everything. So it went from a project pod, which usually is you deliver the work between 5 to 10 squad members over a 3-month sprint. You finish, you disband, and then you reform the squad, to Manulife, where I started with 6 engineers on my team. And then eventually scaled it past 25 engineers after 2.5 years. And after we shipped our 10th model to production, when I arrived, there was only 1 there. So that was really, I would say, I got a lot of rich learning and managerial experience, mainly from that role. Lots of ups and downs, lots of things needed to be tweaked. A lot of things didn't exist, need to build from scratch. So that's where we really dug into what it takes to actually operate at a manager level, but also eventually at a manager of managers level, which eventually had to build some managerial structure underneath. Once we scaled past around, I would say, I want to call it 15, that's the point where it gets starting to get unmanageable, where you have 15 directs. You need almost a layer underneath. So that was another experience building that out.
Yeah, and basically there are also difference, because I also moved from the professional services kind of company to a city, to a municipality, and here I guess it's similar because the city provides services to citizens, and IT is not a core business or a core service. It just supports other services. This is very important to run IT systems, but it's not the service that you're providing to people. So the switch is also kind of between small projects that you're running to a continuous flow of work. Kind of you set the target, you go to it, and then during their journey, you realize there is already a third, fourth, and so on targets that you put on your roadmap and agenda and kind of lay your path to those targets. Do you feel the same, or was it different from your experience?
It's definitely different. But I would say when you're coming up the ranks in a consultancy, you get less exposure to demand generation. You're usually supporting the sales cycle. Where it really came into fruition was when I went back to consulting, and then you have more targets and responsibility there to go to market and demand generate. So on your point earlier about being kind of a cost center of sorts, where you're not exactly the profit center in the business at Manulife, there's always a tension there, especially when you're trying to fight for funding, resources, and everything to deliver your projects. So I like to call it the brown dollar versus green dollar problem. So a green dollar is like directly traced from a customer paying you, and you contribute to that green dollar coming into the company and hitting the P&L. While a brown dollar is a proxy to get that green dollar eventually, usually in the form of cost savings, which is the most accessible lever if you're in an IT back office. But then if you're supporting, let's say, a revenue generating business, such as our wealth and asset management business, where the traders and portfolio managers are making bets on the market, and you can clearly see an ROI, and you're building the data infrastructure to support those group of users, then it's a lot easier to attach your contributions to a green dollar.
And why do you use those colors? I'm just curious.
It's a term I heard from someone a while ago, and I felt like it just stuck with me for whatever reason. I don't know if it's the most scientific way to describe it, but it's just that demarcation point when he said it at the time, it stuck with me over the years. And I just try to use the term.
Got it. Because green sounds something good, like green stuff, green energy, all those things, and brown comes with shit that you have to do, and therefore, like, okay, well,
that's not exactly. Yeah, that's somewhat accurate, because you have to take the brown dollar and clean it off, which is tying it to the green dollar eventually. Yes.
Right. So you take the leaf and you remove whatever the animals left on it, and then it's green leaf that you can use further.
That is actually one of the most undervalued skills when someone moves into engineering management, because if you ask 10 engineers, 9 of them would tell you they hate doing this, trying to turn the brown dollar into green. But a lot of the time, sometimes even how I spend my time in the week, is trying to build up a case that the brown dollars turn more green, so your engineers have projects and funding and the right infrastructure to do the work in the first place.
Come on, we have Greta Thunberg saying us we have all to be green. So engineering managers, please be green and stay green and turn everything you take into green dollars. That's much better than being brown and they're on their, I don't know, color energy or whatever is black or brown in the industry and pollutes all our Mother Earth. Well, come on, easy.
This is a very nice spin on it.
Yeah. So before we go, just curious to ask my listeners whether it would be nice from you, dear, to hear. Do you work in the consulting company, or do you work in kind of a product, or do you work in the supporting role to understand where you're coming from, to bring you more information from those domains and bring you more ideas so that you can implement and use them in your work? And then again, a spin from Manulife, you go to Capgemini, right? Which is again a consulting company. So you're kind of having this pendulum back and forth to the tech consulting. Why did this happen?
So about the 2-year mark, I would say, at Manulife, I checked off a lot of those big milestones that I initially came to the company for, basically. I wanted to have a surefire way to fix the SDLC and get things reliably into production. Wanted to know how to build a team, scale a team, manage talent, grow people's careers. So those are the 2 big things that drew me into the role initially. And when you're in a large enterprise, and like you said, sometimes it's a lot of push and pull to get things done. Sometimes a lot of red tape to navigate. Cleaning that brown dollar is just one example of many things you have to do. After a while, it became the growth just kind of flattened out a little bit, because a lot of the things that are directly in your span of control and also within your span of influence have mostly been exhausted. So to make an impact, it either came down to moving horizontally to a different function and doing that process again, right? Where you exert your span of authority, span of influence, span of control to get the things within that radius done. Because going outside of that is going to require a lot of coordination, a lot of collaboration, a lot of alignment. And I'll be very honest, it's very hard to do until you're up to basically head or like a C-level position to really have global org level impact. And it's usually if you move fast, you at the 2-3 year mark, you've exhausted most of the opportunities within that span of control and span of influence. I really liked my experience in consulting at Accenture initially. And I thought I learned a lot of new things at Manulife, where the opportunity to kind of build up a practice came up within the Canadian market. So I was looking for a change of pace, and I decided to go with this opportunity where I could take a lot of the things I learned from developing talent, hiring people, putting in good processes, and also more importantly, like being able to see it from the client's perspective because you lived inside an environment like theirs for 2.5 years. So when the opportunity came up to go to market, which would be significantly different than delivering a project on an engagement, I just felt like it was a good time to marry the two skills and take a shot at that. So
nice. Because, we have a lot of discussion here in Ukraine is that basically we have consultancy companies who provide services to external companies like Accenture or similar. And on the other spectrum, we have product companies, basically, startups or product companies who deliver products and who work on their own products to create those. And typically when we say products, that the IT is one of their core businesses, right? Which is different from Manulife, where you can provide their service without the IT. It's hard these days, but it's still possible. Did you consider going to a product company I know, for instance, AWS, right, is also there in Canada. So that would be a product because you could have gone to AWS to work on some ML lambdas they have in the cloud or sort of these things.
So the major hyperscalers, the 3 big cloud vendors, were definitely on my radar at the time. However, the dynamics in Canada, it's mostly focused on, again, distribution and finding demand for those cloud services. And so it's mostly driven, sales office driven is a dynamic in Canada because of the close proximity to the US, where the core product-based roles, where you can actually create a new service on AWS and deploy, those would usually are harder to find if you decide to stay in Canada, or the easier path is to make a jump into the US, where the roles are more abundant there. So I considered it, the most easily accessible role is you're trying to sell cloud consumption to largely the same clients, being large financial institutions, telcos, all the big enterprise clients that we deal with. So I weighed that versus delivering services. So I picked that. I also explored some product companies, looked at the local ones that are big, such as Shopify at the time. Went through a couple of interviews there. Decided that it seemed good, but it didn't have that overlap of the skills I was trying to combine. It just made more sense at the time. Plus, the team composition, relationships, and so forth, a whole list of factors made me go one way versus the other. But to answer your question, I kind of explored those 3 paths at the time and felt like building a practice, a consultancy, in a senior leadership role felt like a good move for the next 2 to 4 years of the career.
That's a very interesting and good point for all of us to kind of set your mind and understand what you really want and what are the opportunities that you have on the market, right? And not to jump because something is popular, but rather kind of create your own career by your own thoughts and ambitions, and make a reasonable and well thought through choice when you move through your career to different company. So basically, it sounds to me like you model. Like you had a model and you had the thought.
Sorry. One mental model I like when coaching candidates embarking on a job search is to think about yourself like you're taking a product to market. So product market fit is a very popular and ubiquitous concept now. But then I want to think about candidate market fit as well. So it's not only what the market has to offer, but how you as a candidate can fit that opportunity. So it's the same thing with like finding that overlap. And to flip the job search paradigm around, I like to think about it as you're pitching your services to find one buyer where you're selling all of your service hours to. So in that case, it flips the paradigm of job search. It takes a lot of the pressure off, actually, where you're basically running a one-person consultancy trying to land one client. That is the best fit for your services.
Wow.
Yeah, it removes a lot of the emotional aspects of the job search, I find.
Right. And then basically, but what about the blue ocean concept when you can basically create a new ocean and you'll be very specific candidate, right? Very specific person, as we are all individuals, right? And everyone is different and everyone has specific skills. And we can create our own blue oceans. Would it work as well? What do you think?
Oh, for sure. The best roles I've personally come across, or the people in my network, weren't the roles that were posted and cookie cutter. It was because they knew the other person and they had a strong relationship developed over time that the role was created to fit their skill set and build around them.
Wow.
That's extremely important once you move into senior leadership roles, where it's less fitting like a canned model or a cookie cutter model, but rather like taking the candidate's strengths and then building around that, especially when you move to head, VP, CTO levels. That matters more and more, and the roles are more bespoke. For sure, the best roles are blue ocean, designed around to fit your skill sets. And the more overlap that is, the better it is for both sides, because the company will get to leverage your skill sets the most. You get to use your skill sets a lot as well, creating value for both sides. So that increases things like compensation and everything on the candidate side, and also value delivered for the company.
Wow. We jumped to their career growth. We were your professional.
Yeah.
I want to step back just to get a little bit more information about your role as a head of engineering at two companies, like Manulife and Capgemini, to kind of get their idea what you were doing from terms of like your typical day. What are the tools? What tools did you use? What activities did you perform in both those roles? It'd be nice if you could explain and compare both of them.
Yeah, for sure.
And then we get to career growth. And then we get to career for sure.
Yeah, well, jumping ahead a bit. Yeah, but we sprinkle the insights here and there throughout the discussion. Okay, so for my two roles, I always go with the same principle on taking a job is I understand the workflow first at a macro level. What is required in terms of the idea generating and then the output delivered? And then what's the steps required to do that? Right. And then think about like how you and your team fits into that overall process. So I always get a big picture map first. And then I think about like, what do we need to do to move the needle in that entire process end to end? So it flows. And I do a mini recalibration every week to actually decide what I focus on every week. And then that goes down to the daily tactical level, what I do. So at Manulife, I think about how the work comes in. So let's say it's budget planning season or when funding gets deployed. The seasonality will drive the schedule quite a bit because when the funding first drops, it'll be very, very planning heavy and scoping heavy and doing that brown dollar to green dollar exercise, for example. So you be on the front trying to negotiate what the best projects would be, which has the most impact, and then making sure you have the right resources in terms of talent, tooling, timelines, and everything to deliver on that work. So that's usually start of year. Let that drive it a lot. Then, depending on how the workload comes in, sometimes we have seasons where I focus purely on talent development and things like developing your own team, trying to promote somebody up to be a new manager from an IC to start managing people, or at least expand his or her span of influence. Or it's working with a recruiter, actually, taking multiple calls a week, trying to source new talent when you need to expand the capacity of your team to take on the work. So I usually organize everything at a macro level, and it trickles down to the weekly and then the daily level. So it's a lot of driven by seasonality. Sometimes there's a lot of stuff going into production for the first time. Incidents happen. So you're in firefighting tactical execution mode.
So it's an ops week where you have to be completely...
It's pretty much, yeah. It recalibrates weekly is how I look at it. But I like to let the strategy inform top down, but also the projects inform tactically bottoms up. So we had a lot of concurrent projects at the time, at least 10 to 15 running at the same time. So I ran a team where we were basically data engineering shared services, where the engineers would get deployed onto these projects, and then making sure we work with each of the project squads to ensure the project gets delivered successfully. Because we have 10, 15 at once, and there's only one of me, I usually look at all the projects at the start of the week, and I pick a maximum of 3 at the start of the week where I dedicate a lot of focus on, and I try to move the needle. Then depending on what I learn, I reset for the next week. And I found more weeks where it's a different 3 projects in the last week versus weeks where like it's the same projects over and over again. So yeah, tactics inform, and then the strategy kind of like sets like the general direction.
Wow. It's very structured. It's very structured how you explain.
It looks very coherent on the outside, but you can imagine, the day-to-day, it's jumping from Teams meeting to Teams meeting to one-on-one to finally getting some desk time alone to process all the information and then get it out. So the 9 to 5 is very, very meeting heavy. You don't have, as a manager, you don't really have a lot of long work block times as you do when you're coding. Deep work focus times like 4-hour blocks, 5-hour blocks. Those rarely exist anymore. The deep work I usually do before 9 o'clock or after 5 o'clock. Okay. And then you're basically like getting the requirements, or you're unblocking people during the 9 to 5. I do want to highlight one thing, which when I'm not working on talent management, strategic work like scoping the projects or tactical execution, sometimes what your team needs the most is actually you brokering a partnership or fixing a relationship with another team. So a lot of times it's not spending time with your team, but spending time with other teams. So when you do encounter the other teams, the first interaction, especially when there's contention, is not the first time you've interacted with each other.
Yeah. Basically breaking the ice between those teams, or removing the obstacles and making sure that they are friends, kind of friendly teams, and not seeing problems in each other's behavior, because typically teams have different goals, or as far as I understood, you had a set of talents that you deploy to different projects where they were required. And when those talents, bright minds from different pools come together, they typically are very often they are harsh in saying like, I'm the best, I know how to do it. And they're kind of fighting each other before they kind of form a team to produce a value. And that's normal, right? It's not saying about anything bad about individuals. They might be bright, intelligent, but they are typically kind of saying, well, I know how to best, or have prior experience that it has been done in a different way. And then just to kind of oil it a little bit, or their mechanism of teamwork, and making sure that they understand and speak the same language to achieve one goal.
Yeah, like empathizing is a term thrown around a lot. But I find to truly empathize with them, first is, even at the surface level, do you know where they fit in terms of the overall macro workflow? Right? And then the second thing is, if you were in their shoes and responsible for that leg of the workflow, think about, would you act differently? Or how would you like operate if you were them? Rather than just seeing, why are they operating this way when you're in a different role? And the best thing is sometimes like when you're working with architecture is to go be an architect for a couple months. And you will like see a lot of hidden pressure that everybody is under. When you interact with them, you're seeing the tip of the iceberg of how their overall day is going. But there's a lot of pressures they face in the background. They may be told to conform to a certain design pattern, but you have no idea that they're mandated to actually follow this. When you could easily get into a technical disagreement that this pattern doesn't fit what you're trying to do from a build perspective. which is totally valid. Yeah.
And did I get you correctly that you were sometimes were doing different roles to make sure that you understand what's going on?
I spend a significant amount of time cross-functionally because after a while, your team generally knows what to do from their day-to-day tasks as an IC. Where they get blocked is usually in the cross-functional interactions. So it makes sense to do the bottleneck analysis, and then that's what it concludes. So you go sit in their function for a while. So we had something called the architecture review board at the time, and it's helpful just to sit in on those. And eventually I joined on their panel as well to take a look at what designs come in. So when your design doesn't get approved the first round, you have a better mental map of why that is, what they're trying to do as a purpose of this committee. Instead of having like an immediate knee-jerk reaction as you're blocking me from going live and adding like a 2-week, 3-week delay to my timeline.
No, those jerks are not helping me. Come on, guys. I need to get this done. I made the best design ever. Come on, well, you might have missed something. It's normal. And therefore, you have this committee to support you and help you, right? It's not to block, but rather to make sure that the best decision is taken for the company.
Yeah, even a perspective sometimes. Like if you sit on, taking that same example where you sit on the architecture review board, you see which patterns they're more inclined to approve. So next time when you start a project, if you have a choice between a design pattern that they tend to approve versus an equally good one that is new territory, then you would know ahead of time and you make a better decision before the build is even done or like arrives at the architecture review board for the approval because you have that foresight. So that stuff, like if you spend like an hour a week sitting on the architecture review board, just taking a look at what the designs are that come in, that one insight can save your team potentially months. Because they would build according to
absolutely, because they basically are in process of building, and then you're guide them from the beginning to kind of show that this is not their way. It will be accepted, or it will create more tension and will require more energy for this decision to be accepted by the committee, right? So it's not that bad decision, but it's rather their approach that's used in the company, right? And it's natural that all companies would like to standardize the decision and the approaches are used internally.
Yeah, it's like knowing eyes wide open going in, like you mentioned, is very important. It's okay to deviate from that standard pattern, but knowing the trade-offs of doing so, like expect a delay, expect resistance here and there, and then still making the most informed decision after that to deviate from the design, that's totally valid after accounting for all those things. Yeah, for sure.
And this is in manual life, right? Everything that you've just explained. And was it different at KPGemini?
Yeah, it's very different because the workflow changes and how results are measured changes quite a bit. So like we alluded to a little bit before, because you're in a go-to-market role, and as you climb the consulting ladder, it gets less and less away from delivering the work, but generating the work or knowing what's required to win the work. So a lot of times you're thinking about how do you go to market better, which breaks down into one, how do you capture the existing demand that's there? So if a client comes out with an RFP, how do you best respond to that RFP? So that's capturing the demand that the client realizes they need for services. The other thing is thinking about what offers you can take to market that are innovative, that generates demand. So it highlights problems that the client may have not thought of yet, or it highlights some sort of preventative measure where if they invest something, they save 10x the costs later on. So like thinking creatively to generate demand and also balancing capturing the demand will change the work quite a bit because 70% of my time was dedicated towards those two things. And then 30% was after we've scoped out the work to ensure that we deliver on the promise and the team is in a steady state to see through the entire project, especially for longer term projects such as migrations, which can easily go year, 2 years, 3 years. So that initial phase is critical, right? For me to be very, very hands-on to ensure the team is set up for success, but also the client relationship is there. and they trust the team members itself without needing to go to me for every single thing. So you're enabling your team to step up to the engagement manager role, which is the role I left off at Accenture. So you're training new EMs and making sure like the individual contributors under the EMs are able to deliver on that. Then you move on to the next deal and you repeat the process that way. Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, well.
So very, very different. Yeah.
So you basically first set up their scene when you're trying to sell the process, the project, and support the sales of the project, and then based on the
your
ideas
technical competency.
Yeah, you put in the sales, you basically putting them through the whole process of delivery.
And your technical skills and talent management skills are used in a very different context now. So it's used in a B2B sales and solutioning context, where before you may be making actual fixes in production, and that could be the highest priority issue of the week. But now the highest priority is, how do you empathize with the client to say, if you do this, this is the outcome you will see 3 months, 6 months from now because you've seen it before. And this is why you should invest in a solution such as this. So that's where the technical rigor and kind of acumen and knowledge come in to really hold the conversation and really back up your claims to say, if this is done, this will lead to this result. And here's why you should do it in this way and why we're the best person to partner with to help you execute on this.
Yeah, so basically you change the focus and their perception and the words possibly that you were using, right? Because when you were in a kind of a Manulife setup, as an example, then you are the owner of the solution and you are driving it. Whereas when you're in Accenture, or Capgemini, then you're basically have to listen to what customer says and support his or her ideas with the solutions that you're bringing. And you are not the owner anymore, but you're rather kind of in a supportive role with all your technical expertise and talent management to make sure the customer has a team available for his or her needs to implement the ideas that the customer has.
Yeah, for sure. There's some overlapping elements too, because you asked your listeners earlier whether you're more interested in one or the other. I would say actually it's very worthwhile to invest even 2 years of your career just exploring both. Because even when I was at Manulife, I took a lot of the things I learned from Accenture into the role. One very prominent example is when we had to work with third-party providers such as Accenture. If you're the person who knows how to work with that third party and vet the contract to make sure the scope is tight, the assumptions are reasonable, the pricing is on point, whoever they sent is vetted, because you know how both sides play, that's tremendously valuable and can get years of acceleration on your career, because it's typically not a skill that especially people in engineering would wake up in the morning and think of, let me work on my vendor management. But a lot of the conflict, a lot of the issues happen there. So if you're the person who can step up, have the engineering knowledge and clean that up, your management is going to write a glowing review about you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And another thing that comes immediately with my experience as well is basically when you go to their customer role, like at Manulife or in the city, you have to be clear about the ideas that you would like to implement and write all the supportive documentation, all their budget planning that you mentioned before. So basically you have the experience of working on both sides. You see a sort of their complete picture of bringing their product or the service to life, both from the people who want them and from the side that delivers the professional services to implement this. And then you kind of have your all experience to create your own product if you want, or work on the side that you prefer most, and just act as a bridge sometimes, as you mentioned. That's a really valuable experience to bring to your employee and kind of accelerate the whole process.
Yeah. I think although it's uncomfortable stepping into a go-to-market sales function at least once in your career, opens up like a whole new perspective. Even if the key takeaway is next time you're working with someone with a provider, you know how to better navigate that conversation, even if it's that. Or a lot of times what I appreciate when I was on the services side is working with a client that used to be on the consulting side, because those engagements, especially in the initial stages, go a lot smoother because they know exactly what kind of requirements you would need to put together a service contract. So you cut down the discovery process many fold because it's just both sides know what each other wants. And there's less back and forth. Yeah, from there.
Yeah. So the breadth of your experience, it just helps to improve the speed of the delivery. That's
for sure. Yeah.
And basically, that's this helps us to understand what other skills that one person needs in their current market situation. So that if you have multi-year industry experience, then you could bridge that gap. However, some people would say if you are not sticking to one direction and jumping between the companies, that would say of you of like kind of an uncertain person who basically runs towards something that you really don't know. So you're jumping around without any explanation why you're doing it. What is the best strategy here? What do you say to your mentees, right? As a one that you can.
Yeah. It's a very, very tough question, but essentially, the thesis is I think I have some playbook that is adaptable to most situations, which is the premise of what I'm building my business around right now. So, like you said, it's very, very difficult, and there's no clear answer where you should specialize in this way. You should learn this tool today. A lot of it is you play and flow, right? But if we give the advice to say you got to adapt to your situation, it's not the most actionable for the person listening, right? So what I do is I focus on more macro level skills. So it boils down to actually three key things. The first thing is you're taking in a lot of information on a daily basis. You need to learn new things, and then you need to make good decisions from that, right? So I think the evergreen transferable skill there is learning how to learn. That's the first thing, because there's a lot of coming in, and if you know how to like process that information and pick up the bits and pieces you need to up-level your skills or gain some insight here and there or adjust your skill set. So learning how to learn is the first like meta level skill. The second thing is actually around how do you like after you learn it?
Just to interrupt you. So indeed, I would underline that we never stop learning, specifically in the tech industry, where all the changes are happening, every minute as we talk, something new. A new JavaScript framework is coming out. So you have to learn and understand what are their changes, or support with both hands what you're saying for the first thing.
Yeah, it can be a huge competitive edge, or it could be hugely debilitating. But how much time we spend thinking about how we learn is directly correlated with industries that thrive on chaos, which the tech industry is very, very chaotic because there's more happening, let's say, in one language or one framework in a year's span than a lot of movement in like a whole sector outside of tech. And it's impossible to keep up with everything. So it's being selective of what you learn and then being able to learn something really quickly and adjust. So meta learning is number one. The second thing is, I think, productizing your knowledge or turning that knowledge into scalable assets and leverage is critical. Because as a manager, if you have everything trapped in here, then you're going to run into a bottleneck eventually because you can't be everywhere at once. So a lot of it is, how do you take the knowledge that's up here, turn it into something that's productized? It can be a training guide. It can be like a piece of code where you're automating like a certain portion of the workflow. It can be even passing knowledge onto another team member, and then they help you scale that insight to more team members. So it's knowing how to take what you have and productizing it, building leverage vehicles so other people can tap into those things and become like a multiplier of your efforts. Basically, it's like turning, like I really like the term going from a maker to a multiplier. Because at the beginning, you're making stuff and you get more efficient at making stuff and more reliably and more consistent. But at a certain point, it's about taking your maker skill set and productizing it and putting it into things that you don't have to directly tie your time into and other people can benefit from.
For me, it sounds like you're trying to do something and then you are setting up a framework of the things that you do. So basically, you establish, as I said, a procedure or a code, something like a framework for the team to work, something that you don't have to worry about, but it basically starts to work independently of you once you put it in some, product indeed.
Yeah. It could be a training video. Could even be very simple. I would say a good starting point for a lot of new managers is build an FAQ. So take the questions that you're asked over and over again and where the response is fairly standardized. That's usually a very good place to start, where you just build an FAQ. And that's an asset that can be leveraged. So instead of answering the same question 5 times, then you just point them to the FAQ.
100%.
Recording a training video, that's like perfect example. Yeah. Media assets are great, especially since there's less maintenance than code assets as well. So recording your knowledge, putting into, let's say, podcast formats, video formats, training guides, how-to guides. I never regretted spending extra time on those ever because they always return a very, very high ROI over the duration. It may be painful to do at the beginning, but it's like learning. It's like a muscle you have to kind of train over time and really scale your impact.
I would add here is basically once you create that product, make sure the team uses that product. For instance, with a knowledge base, first time the person comes to you, you answer the question. Second time you say, look, John, here is a website or the web page that I put together or the document. Please go and check it. So a third time you say like, well, remember the document. Let's go and check it. And then once I had this, my experience that the person was like kind of looking at me, it was about to ask the question. And then, I got it. I know where to get the answer. So just the question was immediately disappearing, which was like, okay, well, good. I created a framework, I put the product there and the knowledge out of my head and made sure their team understands how to gain that knowledge and not to kind of check on me here and there.
It's increasingly important as times change because the network effects are more and more pervasive. So like going on your prior example, next time that person gets asked by someone else where it is, he or she will tell that person, go here. Yeah. So then that's like the social network effect, but also the internet has like infinite distribution, basically. So these things become, higher and higher impact as times change. To cap it off, I would say there's a third skill. So to recap, there's meta learning. So learning how to learn to manage the intake. There's productizing your knowledge, which is like the outflow. And then the part that strings it all together, I would say, is relationship building. So those 3 things working in tandem, you're able to most likely adjust to every single situation that you encounter. So anytime put on those 3 skills, they synergize together and they're evergreen transferable skills, which makes it really good. So those lay your foundation. And then you could choose what skills to build on top of that afterwards, depending on your situation. So that's worked really well for me, which is why I'm able to hop from domain to domain.
Yeah. It sounds that it's not only for the work-related stuff, but also for building your own consultancy, as you called it, right? And explaining that you are a learner and here what you did already, here are the products that your boxes that you ship to your team, and then basically going in via social network for the position that were created for you, right? So basically all the 3 would help you not only in your day-to-day job, but also if you go on the market and as a person start looking or create your own company in the future or whatever you like to do.
Yeah. It works in that's why I found it's the magical point, because it works in every single situation. And the more you invest in those three things, you spend less time needing to learn the subsequent skill because it's faster. If you learn how to learn and you have a practice or a discipline of productizing your knowledge and sharing, then you get another rep in terms of internalizing your learnings again. When you publicize or when you decide to write something down. That was a huge unlock for me when I started publishing online and writing posts on LinkedIn, for example, where transferring something that you took a note on your Notion document to formalizing it into a publication quality post. You get way more reps on that concept again. You publish, and then people will interact and give you feedback. So you get even more reps there. So essentially 2-3x the number of repetitions you get in that concept, which accelerates your learning.
Yeah, absolutely. I see lots of people actually writing down their posts on LinkedIn, on Twitter threads, kind of to make sure that they they put all together what they learned in some situation. And I do appreciate those people who describe it in steps and put it simple. Sometimes people are making business out of this. Well, understandable why. But it's more interesting to read those people coming from experience, right? Not only your people are teaching this, but kind of like you had the experience and then wrapping it up all together and they're sharing with the audience what can be done and what could be done in different situations. And yeah, that makes sense. But let's tackle it from a different angle. So you have all the three are kind of soft skills, right? How to learn, then productize, and basically the networking. But what about the hard skills? Are they equally important, or kind of could you get?
They are, because you need the hard skills to when it's brass tacks, you need to execute. You do need the hard skills to deliver, or even when you're in a non-hands-on role. You need to understand those hard skills to even be able to delegate effectively, communicate effectively with the individual contributors doing the work. Because tech is so wide, I came from like AI, machine learning, and then data engineering. There's people, let's say, in web development, mobile development. They'll have a different stack and different kind of priority in terms of their skills, right? But one thing I would encourage is to look for patterns. Like, what does good software development look like? Those are, again, like fundamental skills that you can carry across. For me, I think the hard skills differ depending on the situation. For example, when I moved from Accenture out into Manulife, data engineering was at the top of the list. So learning how to do, like, sometimes the boring stuff, like how to do really clean data integrations from your source systems into your data platform, learning how to build a data model that reflects your business logic, everything, being able to go into a database and troubleshoot, tune the queries up to be more performant. But those are things I wouldn't tell everyone to just go pick up those things, because it's very situationally dependent. I would go back to, what does your workflow look like? Where are the bottlenecks in your workflow? And then what are the hard skills and soft skills needed to address that bottleneck? For us, we had a lot of trouble getting AI models into production. So that's where the data engineering stuff came in. We realized all the issues is upstream in the data lifecycle, not at the modeling step. It's all about maintainability and getting something production grade, so it doesn't stay as a proof of concept in production and sandbox and just dies in the sandbox. So that was what led me to take on data engineering. And then when I take on data engineering, I noticed, okay, I need to get better at architecture, because there's a design step for the build. So you don't build ETL workflows and end up in a pipeline jungle of sorts with massive tech debt. So then architecture became more important. And then also platform became more important, because we noticed our build sits on the platform itself. So then that led me to dig more into cloud. But then there's a logical sequence of when you add skills to your repertoire, rather than following cloud is a hot skill, so I should learn cloud, or a cloud engineer gets paid X, I want to make X, so I'm going to learn cloud. The reason they get paid X is in a context, but without understanding that context, you're not going to be able to fit your cloud skills into that context that delivers value.
Well, absolutely. Every thing happens in independence with others, so you don't know the past, how the person came there. But as you're kind of going through the hard skills that you had as an example, what is it better, and how do managers balance between soft skills and the hard skills? So I need to take care of my team, right? I have to make sure everything works smoothly, but I also have to learn, a new AI model that can on Hugging Face, right? And dive into it and look, and it takes time, right? And I have also a personal life outside of my 9-to-5 work. How to balance all those things?
So if I were only to give one tip on that, is knowing at which layer of abstraction to stop. Because you dig into a new library, new framework, new programming language, new tool, there's almost infinite depth that you can go into. And especially as an engineering manager, you can't possibly go into infinite depth, or you would just be stuck on the first tool forever. Because there's layers and layers and layers. So it's knowing what's the logical stopping point for your use case, but also is what you're expected to cover versus what you can rely on others to cover. Because trying to cover everything to the nth degree is not efficient, especially when you have a team. And sometimes I think knowing when to sacrifice, let's say, the merits of the technical solution for more, let's say, velocity, and knowing when that trade-off makes sense and when that trade-off doesn't is critical. So sometimes you don't need to understand that library inside out to get that model into production. But if you're, let's say, in an ops role where you're maintaining the models, then maybe like a different layer of rigor is needed. Or if you're you're in an admin role on the platform, that would probably require a different level of depth in terms of infrastructure understanding versus a developer using that infrastructure to get it built out. So it's knowing what the trade-off is and how I can better spend my time opportunity cost-wise is to decide like which layer of abstraction to dig deep into. So if this is one tip, that's the main thing, I think, in tech.
Yeah, that's a very good one. But still, how to kind of dedicate, how to find the time. Because, for instance, one of the inspirational sources for me is a podcast listening on the tech topics that I can do outside of my work hours when I walk around or clean the flat, and I basically consume that information, right? Not necessarily trying it out, but at least staying kind of on the surface of the whole happening in the tech specifically.
I have a few tactics.
Yeah.
I have a few tactics in mind. So one thing is just earmarking your library of like good resources as you come across them. So later on, when it's like, oh, I need something from that framework, you're not researching from scratch. You can access your own library and like go there. Then it's about like, how do I get a baseline understanding of the theory really, really quickly? And having like the best reference text to that. Then being very, very good at spinning up a sandbox and doing a minimum build to validate that theory works in practice. So it's like not over engineering the build, but like have the very, very minimum build just for you to internalize that concept. So it's like knowing where the theory lies, the best theory, and then like being able to implement that theory in the least amount of time possible in a sandbox. So that's one thing. The other thing I do is look in GitHub repositories of other teams that you don't directly work on their projects. Because even if you spend, let's say, 1/100th of the time, 1% of the time that it takes to actually build up that repository, which is equivalent to maybe half a day on a Saturday, but that's a 6-month project, right? Even if you get 20% of the learning versus someone who's on the project delivering, that's still a 20x return because you're only spending 1% of your time to get 20% of the learnings off of somebody else's project.
So basically reusing their time, right? Or the time spent.
Basically, yeah, because they went down the false path. They like figured out, they got that project live and into production. Then you could just trace like the chronology of that project. You won't get 100% because nothing beats actually being on the project. But even if you get like 10%, 20%, 30%, you're spending a fraction of the time to get that learning. So I play project roulette on the weekend sometimes where I just sift through project one. Do I get the gist of it? What are 3 key takeaways from this project? And then I just move on. I don't get caught up in the details because it'll just be an infinite kind of thing, and then move on to
Do you write it down as well? Kind of their thing.
I write it down.
Nice.
Yeah, like a journal a little bit, just quick notes. It's like, okay, take away 3 things from this. And then once I get the 3 takeaways, I move on. I find setting that constraint works very well. Because if you don't limit yourself to 3, then you'll be sitting on that repo for a long, long time.
And what tools are you using for those notes, like keeping them in years and years?
It's bare minimum. I try and go minimalistic. So just Doc, right? Basically Google Doc is where I keep a lot of my stuff. When I was working in the enterprise, it's just I use whatever suite's there. So it's OneNote since we're on Microsoft Suite. I don't try to overcomplicate it. I just make sure I do the practice consistently. Because if I try to implement too complicated of a knowledge management system, I'll be less inclined to do it, and then you get less reps in.
Well, you can get kind of use a Notion or something like that, and use all the
I use
and all
Notion
the
now.
fancy stuff. Got it.
Yeah, to categorize and search for stuff later on.
Right.
So that's another practice I do. The other thing is having peers in your industry, very, very important. And that's something I wish I knew earlier because as you move up past the IC level and into the managerial level, especially when you move into VP, CTO, there's fewer and fewer people within the company that can help you solve, let's say, a CTO level problem. Because by definition, there's only one CTO, right? And your peer is essentially the CEO and the board of directors, which you're not going to be able to bring a
very, very different questions and problems that they
very different. The only source is you talk to other VP engineering and other CTOs because they're dealing with CTO level problems. Right. So less and less you're able to rely internally to tap. But when you're an IC, you find plenty of other senior engineers and engineering managers to tap into.
Yeah, that was your third point, right? With their social networking and their the relations are not only within your company, but rather industry-wide, right? Or to
if you put what you're working on, kind of like thoughts and stuff out there, then that acts as a mechanism where people can find you. And it self-selects as well. So it self-selects down to people who are also interested in that. So every conversation you have is like more curated, more rich, and more relevant.
Yeah, nice. So basically we tackled how to work on technical things or being an EM, because this is actually a very open problem for lots of people, right? They are going to the industry and specifically those are EMs who have limited or prior technical experience, whereas all those also exist and they might be very successful. I had a very interesting guest who had a limited tech experience, or just we'll put here the link to one of those that episode, and she's very successful as a person, and she basically has more soft skills rather than hard skills. And there is no single answer, right? Or just find the way you work out, and it works out for you.
I think there's many roads to making a high impact, and it's not one game plan will get you success. There's different strategies to get there, and if that road doesn't really fit you, there's not only one road to get there. So if you're very good at soft skills and it makes sense to double down on them, and maybe that's like what your team needs at the time, then it totally makes sense to go all in on that. Mm-hmm. And vice versa sometimes, right? Sometimes they're good organizationally. It's just this bug that's preventing you from going into production. So you need to put your fixer hat on and like go really deep into the code to help them fix that. So,
look, Casey, I see you're very structure it with all your career, and as you're giving career advice, can you open up the future where you're planning after you have your successful startup brought by Google or by whatever company you're willing to sell and get $1 million? Are you planning to work for somebody or just spending that money that you got?
Oh man, I used to be the biggest long-term planner. And I find that over time, as I learn more things, my planning horizon shortens and shortens because of the variance that I know that if I come back on the podcast 6 months later, the game plan would probably look drastically different because you're getting data points every day on that stuff. But then now I take an approach where I have very like short-term tactical goals, but then I make sure I work on, let's say, those transferable skills long-term. So I have the adaptability to adjust and like pivot and move where I want. In terms of the business, I think it's just step 1 to 2 year horizon is just making sure I package up the things that like I've learned through my own experience and from others, and making sure like we package them into like reproducible, reliable solutions. So then the clients coming in can see that success. Because what I find is past the senior IC level, the level of ambiguity just goes up. Mm-hmm. And it's people value like more predictability, more certainty, and a more surefire way to make progress. Because it's a lot of messy things, and that won't go away. But there's things that we can control in terms of how we spend our time, our mindset, and everything. That's the overall mission we're trying to do. And I'm mostly trying to take a non-technical skills angle to it, because honestly, like the internet's very rich with resources and you can learn almost anything, but it's really that like mindset thinking and also non-technical skills that would benefit a tech career quite a bit. Yeah.
Absolutely. It would be nice to have you, or well, sometime in the future to see how it went with
how it evolves
with your plan, right? To see whether it worked. Well, hope it worked for you, right? I just want to be mindful of your time. So one last thing that I had on my list is that you basically are a manager of your own right now, right? You, as far as I understand, you don't have any employees. You're just you're running your own startup. And before, as you mentioned, you had some teams that you were managing, that you were driving, moving forward. What do you miss from having a team?
There's a sharp trade-off from, I would say, like my point of view is actually a bit wider now because I spend less time in any one particular org or one particular situation. But then you get to see like more situations from a breadth perspective, because every client will bring in some sort of a unique situation that he or she's trying to navigate. So your data points are more varied, but with coaching, it's different than being their engineering manager and seeing things day to day. So you sacrifice a bit of depth for the breadth. Mm-hmm. So what I'm trying to do is like from the breadth, I'm trying to find patterns that can help people basically when they're in the trenches day to day trying to navigate things. So there is that trade-off. I still rely on my personal network quite a bit. It's evolved because now I'm into entrepreneurship. I find a lot of my time is spent talking to other entrepreneurs too. So that's diversified for me as well. And I expect it to continue to evolve over time. But I still heavily tap on my existing network of engineering leaders. I'm trying to find good reference points, sources of inspiration, and good practices, anti-patterns as well. A lot of success is knowing what to avoid. So yeah, I'm still very much a knowledge and framework collector of sorts is what I like to look at it. So yeah, always stand on the shoulder of giants. It's most of these problems, I think it's finding the right remix of things that already exist rather than inventing anything from scratch.
Yeah, it's hard actually to invent, and you can basically collect all different things and then something new comes out of it. That's a very typical approach.
I always encourage my clients to be a tasteful collector. Because honestly, even people will like put a high value on good curation if you have good taste, good filter, because the internet's very vast, it has a lot of good stuff out there, but filtering it down is not easy. So I rely on people I feel like have a good taste, good filter for good stuff. And then I lean on them heavily as well.
I hope you will recommend this podcast to your clients or other episodes as well. I'm trying to also find interesting guests here so that they share their experience and they're, well, hopefully bring something new to the audience.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, Casey, thank you very much. I really enjoyed this conversation. It was very insightful with all your experience and different views and the structure that you have in your head in your work. Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
If people want to reach out to you or find you, or what is the best way for them to contact you?
I think LinkedIn is the social platform I play on the most. So yeah, give me a follow, connect on LinkedIn, drop me a DM there. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter as well. Also building up my website and newsletter, but that's more on the back burner TBD. So LinkedIn for now.
Yeah, we'll put the link to your LinkedIn profile in the description. So just go and check out what Casey is writing, and it's quite an interesting stuff. So thank you very much. Yeah, and have a good one.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.